good, everybody? So we have this video here by Vars 2, why no one plays Rosia in Wuthering Waves. I am someone who has pretty much pulled on every single character in Wuthering Waves apart from two. Number one, Cantarella, and number two, Rosia. And honestly, I'm kind of glad because I have never found a use for either of these characters. I've never felt that my teams were lacking because of it. You might argue maybe my Camellia, I could probably maybe use her in Tower Adversity if I had Rosia, but I don't think even that would make much of a difference. So let's go into why exactly Rosia is pretty doo-doo. As someone who doesn't have her and has never played her, I'm curious to see what others have to say about it. Let's have a look.
Wuthering Waves has been able to maintain a fairly balanced roster in terms of character usability. Even as we've been getting more powerful teams and units, the general scaling of the game has been stable throughout most of version 2, with the majority of characters that came out in 2025 have...
What are we talking about? Like, I don't know if I would necessarily agree in terms of like scale and stability, because it's I don't know, I feel like there's definitely been an increase in overall like strength of like teams, because we're actually, I think for the first time throughout 2.0 we've actually been getting teams that work together. 1.0 we had characters you could kind of fit together that would make sense in terms of their kits, but now we're getting like full on like team building that feels way more like interlinked and connected between characters, that makes them feel like over a course of a whole team and like rotations like a lot stronger. I think the only outlier being like Cardathea, who just is a broken character overall, that is just stronger than every other character that is really in the game on her own. But I think we've seen Kuro kind of taking that team building into effect and actually making characters work with each other a lot better.
Having a strong team or combat engine to be
everyone has their best in slot supports where 1.0 didn't. It's very valid.
A part of. It does help that there are two distinct endgame modes with a contrasting win condition, wherein Tower of Adversity is mostly predicated on boss killing while Whimpering Waste is about wave clearing. So even if you're not the best in one mode, you can usually excel at the other and vice versa. For example, Camellia by all accounts would have fallen behind the current meta if we view it purely on the basis of TOA, but she's been surviving nicely thanks to Whimpering. That being said, are there any units who haven't been able to really find any worthwhile presence in either? Yes, in fact, Rosia.
I'm gonna save my thoughts.
When Rosia first came out back in 2.0,
is it Rosia or Rosia? I'm pretty sure it's just Rosia, right? That's how I've always said it. That's how I will say I went from hating her initial like character design to kind of appreciating it. I do appreciate her look.
Opinions are mixed on how effective she would be. Even in my video on her, I pointed out a couple notable concerns in regards to her gameplay and toolkit, which of course I'll be recapping in this video. And while people expected her to jump up in relevance upon the release of Whimpering Waste, to which she did, it didn't last very long. Currently, Rosia is one of the lesser played and known 5-star units in the game, and one of the least played version 2 units. I figure it's about time we make a Why No One Plays episode on the theater kit. I'll be going through all the reasons why I think she's been having trouble measuring.
The theater kid that had no emotion in her voice. That's so sad. Aww. Tears.
Up compared to her version 2 peers, and then later offer suggestions on how they can remedy that. Probably would be best to start with the aforementioned recap on the concerns I had towards Rosia's kit and situation even when she first came out. One of the main things I noticed was how compared to most other secondary units or just units in general, it wasn't exactly clear what Rosia was supposed to be or what role she was meant to fulfill. Parts of her gameplay suggested.
I'm pretty sure, wasn't there a thing that like with Rosia, if you wanted her to deal damage, you kind of had to like S6 her essentially. Or something along those lines, that she completely changes like a unit the more that you delve into her. I call her Rocata, like the cheese, because it's funny. Okay, crazy.
She could be a DPS unit, as evident by her balancing attack pattern having decent AoE. At the same time, other parts of her kit implied she was more of a utility character than a damaging one, not the least of which being her.
Because what's your point? Because she spends like an unusual amount of field time, does she not? Like, you actually end up using her quite a bit, whereas other characters that are just more like there for like to be a support don't really take that much time at all, especially when you compare her to like Rosia versus Sanhua in terms of like what you're getting out of them. Sanhua being great because she takes like next to no time and gives pretty decent like basic attack like buffs, compared to like for Rosia, for her to be like completely justified, you want her to be also doing the damage that she needs given how much time she's on the field. And I feel like it just didn't make like sense for a lot of people, or it was kind of worth it. It's like, what do we you have to kind of be really good at one particular thing for people to find a use for you. And I think that seems to be a lot of the problem here, is there is not really one particular thing she does overwhelmingly well that makes her useful to use or worth pulling for.
Liberation, offering up to a flat 200 bonus attack to the entire party at 70 crit rate or higher. One of her inherent skills also gave her party the ability to cast one of her tornadoes by using the utility skill. You know what I'm talking about, the wings or hookshot button. And of course, she had the attribute and attack type damage amp on her actual skill, strongly hinting at her being a secondary unit. Thing is,
yeah, because I remember the grouping with the tornadoes was a big thing, because I remember at the time when kind of Whimpering Wastes like first came out properly, the biggest complaint by far was like grouping, right? And enemies being pushed out and spread out. And when Rosia was on the scene to be released, it's like, she's gonna be the character that you're really gonna want to use in your Whimpering Waste teams because she can group enemies. But now we're seeing basically every new DPS character that comes out has either automatic grouping or AoE that just kind of eliminates things in a larger area anyway. So it's kind of like she was never even like great well, she's good for that, but she was never like the choice to pick to put in like a team, because most characters have AoE now built into that entire kit.
with the way she was built, there would only be one or two characters that would pragmatically care to have her, and in those cases, there wasn't much of an aspect of synergy between them and Rocha, leading us to the first problem with her kit. Rocha doesn't really have a proper through line connecting her to her main DPS units. When looking at other secondaries that came before her like Yinlin, Zhezhe, Sanhua, Mordefi, even Changli, there was either direct or indirect synergy between them and their partner. In the case of Yinlin, Zhezhe, and Mordefi, their respective liberations provide an off-field damage. You can go about the rotation quickly, then switch out to go crazy on your primary attacker. Changli and to some extent Yinlin also had the capacity to quick swap, enabling a dual DPS strategy. Meanwhile, Sanhua was solely meant for getting in, buffing, then getting out. Rocha by comparison's a bit strange. Though she could resemble Sanhua playstyle-wise, a full rotation on Rocha was more time-consuming.
I don't think I've ever seen someone like do quick swap Rosia. Like, that would be crazy. Yeah, if someone could pass me some information of a Rosia quick swap, that'd be wild. That would be cool.
And her buffing repertoire came off a bit mediocre for a 5-star character. Both she and Sanhua play the role of basic attack augmentation by way of their respective outros. Just by looking at these two alone, Sanhua's outro comes out ahead rather convincingly in any situation that isn't expressly a Havoc basic attacker, which already limits Rocha's body versatility. Outside of that, the 200 flat attack buff on her liberation is a bonus attack, not base attack, meaning it doesn't scale off any percent attack bonuses, it's just a flat 200 attack. Similarly, Sanhua.
So it seems like we're getting problems in the actual numbers of her talents and in her skills as well. It's not just the actual functionality of how her kit works. It's the numbers and letters and the coding itself that really put her at a bit of a disadvantage. It kind of feels a little bit like Yinlin in that aspect, where the actual kit itself, the actual real numbers just don't really help. And don't seem to be as what they should be, which is kind of unfortunate.
Plus, S6 provides a 20% attack buff to the active character as well, essentially causing the two to overlap with each other in functionality for the teams you'd expect to put Rocha in, that being Camellia and Havoc Rover. Here's where things get tricky for the Jester Girl. I mentioned earlier that Rocha's field time is considerably higher than Sanhua's. It's not by that much to cause trouble for most damage dealers though. That is, most damage dealers except Camellia. One of the weaknesses of Camellia is that running through a full rotation burns up a serious amount of time, potentially long enough to exhaust Shorekeeper and Verina's outro skills before the rotation ends. In addition to having base,
especially if you're doing Tower of Adversity and you get knocked down a couple of times, you're kind of cooked. Like, you need to be playing kind of perfectly for you to time everything properly, or you have some like dupes on some characters. Like you get knocked down 1 or 2 times and you're kind of like, okay, kind of restart. You're not getting the full worth out of a character.
Attacks. Sanhua was the perfect secondary for Camellia by taking a minimal field time. The caveat is that Sanhua herself does effectively no damage, bringing us to the only part where Rocha could outpace her. However, to have a meaningful increase in party DPS.
And the thing, like, a character that only does damage, but that only works when, or you take into consideration what your team is lining up against. Here's the thing, if you're using someone like Sanhua, because it doesn't really matter the fact that she's Glacio, because she's not dealing damage, you're only caring about the buffs that she gives and the fact she has no field time. She's way more universal than someone like Rosia, who she has a longer field time, so she has to be dealing damage, but you have to take into account that that's against maybe characters that aren't are susceptible to Havoc itself. You can't just throw her in any sort of fight and expect her to work in the same way. Sanhua, it doesn't matter what enemy that she's up against in her team, it literally doesn't matter whatsoever. But Rosia, you also have that limitation too, which is something to consider. So now you're really only gonna have a user with characters that are susceptible to the Havoc attribute, which isn't, again, just more layers.
PS over Sanhua, Rocha would not only have to do more damage than her, but she would have to do significantly more damage to make up for the fact that you'll delay Camellia's rotation and therefore potentially run out of your sustained buffs, placing even more onus on Rocha to deliver. Thing is, Rocha demanded a pretty serious amount of investment to bridge that gap and merit the cost of obtaining her. In other words, to justify spending asteroids to pull for a 5-star character, you had to spend more asteroids on that character, ultimately defeating the purpose of a worthwhile value proposition. To even remotely,
she's one of the worst pull value characters. Like if I had to do a tier list of the most pull value characters, she'd be like right at the bottom, like way right at the bottom.
Start Rocha ahead of Sanhua, pulling tragic comedy was basically obligatory, and even then it wasn't by that much.
That's true, because not only do you have to worry about Rosia, it's Rosia plus her weapon, which makes it double the asteroid proposition cost, maybe a third, depending if you get lucky on a 50-50, right? That's wild. Compared to a 4-star and an Emerald of Genesis, which you could obtain for free, multiple copies of. Like, literally the value proposition couldn't be so different.
Of course, if you can pull for sequences and whatnot, then yes.
Yeah, for what, 6k more DPS on Rosia? But here's the thing, but Sanhua does 20k DPS on any enemy. Rosia, you're only going to be using against Havoc non-resistant enemies, so
It does technically surpass Sanhua by a considerable degree, but to do all that for what is effectively a marginal gain, again pulling Rocha plus their signature weapon and maybe even a few sequences, you're looking at upwards of half a grand in USD. The payoff better be worth it. And pragmatically speaking, it just wasn't. Even if Rocha's better than Sanhua for the likes of Camellia and Havoc Rover, it's nowhere near enough to justify the hoops you had to go through to get to that.
And the great thing is you never had to. Rosia was never like required for the teams to be strong enough to clear the content. Cabinetz in a really rough spot with TOA right now, like 100% for sure. But yeah.
Point. There is one other aspect that people were curious about. Rocha had by far the best grouping of any character to date. Her skill.
She's not affected by Glacio enemies. It doesn't matter with Sanhua what enemy she's kind of really up against too much, because you really just care about her buffs. Like I really don't care about Sanhua's DPS unless like you're on a knife edge of like time, then yes it would matter. But if you're not on a knife edge, it doesn't really matter as much as someone as Rosia would.
At a massive radius, allowing her to group entire enemies together, which would have you believe that she could be of immense benefit in spots where enemies are spread out or there are just a lot of them. And she was. Shortly after she came out, Whimpering Waste came out as a new game mode, right away giving Rocha an opportunity to make stuff happen. The first iterations of Whimpering were a playground for her. She had no trouble clearing and grouping entire waves one after another, making her one of the best Whimpering characters in the game during early version 2. But even in that scenario, there was a minor but prevalent issue that had yet to be addressed. Rocha's perk of AoE kind of overlaps with the main attacker she's best suited for. Camellia is a basic attack-oriented Havoc unit. Sounds like a perfect combination for Rocha, doesn't it? To be fair, it is, but the minor problem is that Camellia doesn't struggle with AoE. One would say she could easily get by without needing a supplementary grouping unit, further diminishing.
True, because you kind of just like AoE everything down pretty quickly. But again, like I said, most new characters in 2.0 all have AoE built into their kits now. Like basically all of them.
The incentive to play Rosia over simply going Sanhwa. Not to imply you can't play Rosia in a different team as just an independent clear, but we start to run into a practicality dilemma, where in situations where Rosia could fit into a party, even one that is...
Also, I just noticed, do you know what lovely manicured hands. What lovely pristine manicured hands that we're using for these. W hand models.
Isn't exactly compatible with her, chances are you're not playing at a challenging enough difficulty for it to really make a difference at all, and in any situation where said incompatible team does need grouping assistance, the loss in overall party damage caused by swapping in Rosia
Pyro image? No, I'm just pointing out the hands.
likely cancels out any benefit you'd get from adding her in the first place. It was just really difficult to find a circumstance that 1. Gave Rosia a meaningful advantage over cheaper alternatives, and 2. Did so in a way that was practical, as in you weren't trying to force her into a team that she wasn't compatible with. That conundrum was exacerbated later on in version 2. For one, new teams are coming into play that were capable of taking on Whimpering Waste on their own. For instance, the Monospectral and Darrow teams. Though they were definitively more effective in Tower of Adversity, they had enough AoE and more...
And then team building entered the chat. Team building entered the Wuthering Waves building.
Importantly, staying power to get you through Whimpering. One reason Rosia was so good when the game mode first came out was that most version 1 attackers had low staying power. They could only attack for a short bit of time, and then they would enter a cooldown period where you'd have to wait a while. But Versani and Cardathea, on top of their secondaries, Phoebe and Chacona dishing out solid damage of their own, they themselves could attack for a while too, or spread out their DPS over a long rotation time. This would continue to be observable in other teams. The Monofusion team has all 3 characters attacking and dealing damage, certainly at a higher degree than Rosia. Then after we got Vrlova, arguably the most effective Whimpering character in the game to date by way of her ability to be present on the field without being the active character and the wide area coverage of Hecate's attacks. During this
Vrlova is such a good character to use. I find myself using her in a lot of situations, even like holograms, for example. Like I don't really tend to stick with the typical team building when it comes to holograms. My ethos is just use what works and deals damage. Throw Vrlova on, use someone else, I'm good. I actually really like Vrlova. She grew on me a lot as a character.
time, Whimpering's higher difficulties have become increasingly more durable, requiring players to dish out higher total damage to wipe them out. To reiterate, Rosia's damage output was good for clearing low health enemies in the early days of Whimpering, but she might find herself struggling to kill mooks as comfortably as she used to. All the while, more options have been made available for Whimpering Waste. Camellia and Gian were about the only comfortable clearing options back then. Now though, we have Cardathea, Vrlova, Augusta, Monofusion, so on and so forth who can perform comfortably if not efficiently in Whimpering, leaving Rosia with very little method of recourse to compensate.
And Rosia works with none of them. She belongs with absolutely none of them. She has no place.
For it. As it currently stands, Rosia's biggest problem has to do with opportunity cost. It isn't that she's an objectively unusable character or that she can't play into any specific niche. Rather just, that same amount of time, wherewithal, and investment you put into her can be put into someone else for a greater benefit. Or you don't have to put in...
True. Again, it's not the case that she doesn't work or have a place. You can if you want her to. If you really like her, use her. That's what it boils down to. If you like her, use her. But if you want to be... especially if you're free to play. I think that's what this comes down to. If you're a free-to-play person and you care about your resources and the longevity of you playing the game and making sure you keep up to date with all the content, you kind of have to plan a bit more strategically. And Rosia is probably the worst thing you could do to brick your progression and halt your progression for very little gain, which is kind of sad.
Any investment at all to achieve an equal benefit. Again, if you already have a max sequence on...
What if we add Rosia in the standard banner? That would be great. I would love to see Yinlin and Rosia in the standard banners. I think that would be really cool. And that would be, if I had to cast a vote, that's where my vote would go.
She offers basically the same thing for Camellia that Rosia does. Not only Sanhua, Danjin can also act as a secondary for Camellia. In essence, Rosia was already coming into a saturated category. Now, if you were to say put $500 into Rosia by getting sequences and a signature weapon, sure, you'd get a stronger secondary for Camellia, but take that same $500 and get Vrlova and her signature, or Choyuan, or Augusta, or even Camellia's own sequences, and not only will you get someone who can achieve a lot more in Whimpering, but they can also get stuff done in town.
If you could brick your account by pulling one 5-star that's a game, I never said it would brick your account. I said it would halt your progression. That's what I said. I never said pulling Rosia will completely brick and ruin your account. I very specifically said it's going to halt your progression because you are not going to get the gains that you would probably want compared to others. And I do think that's just down to a badly designed character more than like an overall game problem. Like, that's not a power creep problem. I think it's just one of the cases they just made a bad character. Like, in isolation, they just made a character that underperformed.
Or any other area, giving you more bang for your buck. If you pull for her and invest in her, you can make her work, but the same could be said for literally any character at that point. Rocha is also too applicably specific for a 5-star character. Most of version 2's units may have a select niche they play into, like Mono Fusion, Mono Spectral, Mono Arrow, Echo Skill Damage, Rapid Shield Stacking, what have you, but if you can go through the trouble of gearing them up and getting their teammates, a Frolova Cantarella Choyuan team basically annihilates the entire game. They're so universally good that it justifies the cost to get all of them. Thing is, Rocha's gameplay and design are by no means bad. I for one very much enjoy the bouncy attacks on her forte, and she doesn't feel bad or clunky to play either. It's a pretty intuitive rotation from start to finish. While it does take up a decent amount of field time, if the output is high enough, it can justify the need for it. For example, despite being a secondary, Iono's rotations can go pretty long, but in her case, it's well worth it as she can pump out insane damage output for a secondary and also set up a Gusto or GN for big damage as well. Long field time on its own isn't a bad thing, it's all contextual. So here's what I think will work for Rocha if hypothetically I had the authority to buffer. Kudero, if you're watching this, you can take—
Interesting. Oh, we're going to theory crafting how to make her better. Ooh, wow, I like this. This is gonna be fun.
Take this as feedback. To start, Rocha needs more damage, that much is obvious. If her damage gets a boost, you can also have her play in Tower of Adversity as well. She can take care of the initial enemies that come before the boss, which of course addresses a problem of her being too specific. Secondly, I think they can afford to be a bit more generous with their ultimate buff. Getting 70 crit rate requires you to invest a good amount of echo substats to get to that point. To do all that for a mere 200 attack, we can definitely give a bit more.
Yeah, anything that requires me to upgrade less echoes and have to roll more on RNG and rip my hair out for a character to be usable or good, I would take any day. Like, especially for a character that's supposed to be more on the support side, like, you really don't want to be bashing your head against like RNG.
Come on. Looking at Choyuan, who carries an identical liberation, he gives a 30% crit damage buff while requiring 5% less crit rate. 30 crit damage is a lot more substantial than a flat 200 attack. Perhaps if they
yeah, like that almost feels insulting. That genuinely, flat 200 attack genuinely almost feels like insulting.
It based on a portion of Rocha's own attack instead of a flat amount, that would not only raise her buffing ceiling, but it could also give free-to-play players a way to invest in her, since you can attack max on her as best you can for a huge party-wide buff. Hypothetically, let's say it becomes 20% of Rocha's own attack, so if you have 3000 attack on Rocha, that becomes a 600 flat attack boost. Or what they could do is uncap the crit rate, make it cap at, I don't know, 90% or 100% crit, so you can get 400 or 500 attack. At that amount, it begins to matter, especially with how many double and triple DPS teams are getting. That would be my main suggestion. A party-wide buff that can actually scale would make her significantly more accessible and effective at the same time.
But then, I like that overall, but I don't think it changes the fact that where would you slot her in teams? Like, she would be a better unit on her own, but again, we've already established a lot of her issue comes down to like team compositions and where it like actually matters. And I don't know if even that kind of buff would justify using her over anybody else. Still, like, good for her individually in the teams that she already like has a place in, but I don't know about expanding her reach.
I also think they need to spiff up her magic box thing. The fact that it does a flat 100 damage makes it next to pointless for a skill. I get that for the time it came out, the idea that a character could give another character an extra skill sounded broken as hell, but we've now reached a point where units like Frolova are actively attacking while technically being off-field. They could afford to give Rocha some concessions. Last idea I have for Rocha would be to push her into Havoc Bane. Havoc Bane is the attribute debuff.
I've been saying this, give Havoc Bane to Havoc Rover. I'd say give it to every character. I don't know. Rosia would benefit from this a lot because of Havoc Bane is essentially like basically a dot And the fact that she has like AoE means that she'd be able to apply it very, very quickly. So I think she would be a character that benefits, and it'd be really easy to implement Havoc Bane into one of her like attacks.
For Havoc, they could just make her general support by giving her the ability to play into the Havoc Bane. It presents an opportunity for her to synergize with any future units that come out. Right now, Rosia doesn't have much room for synergy with the Havoc niche the way other secondary units do, so by giving her more ways to do that, it can increase their value proposition. Ultimately though, it would be no exaggeration to call Rosia the black sheep of Renacida. Most if not all units that came out during version 2 were either really good on release like Carlotta and Augusta, or they had some potential and then that potential came to fruition later in the future like Brant, Frolova, and Cantarella. Rosia on the other hand hasn't been able to find any real opportunity to piggyback off future developments, whether it was because Kuro wasn't thinking about going in that direction, or their decision to kneecap Rosia's power was intentional.
It's kind of interesting because I want to know where on the production line they decided to make a lot of these character kits. Because as we know, they're kind of like a year ahead when it comes to character designs, kits, like figuring them out, like building everything. They're literally like a year ahead in terms of like conception starting to build. So I want to know at what point, like at what stage were they planning out like Rosia? Because I'd assume Rosia and Brant maybe were kind of done in similar time frames. And knowing what came after pretty quickly after Rosia and how that all transpired, why they decided to change maybe their design philosophy a little bit when it comes to teams. Because very quickly we saw a change in design philosophy of team building and mono teams and things like that. So I think I'll be really curious if we ever got any insight into just why that happened. Because it really feels like a shift in like the way that they make characters in Wuthering Waves. Like literally came after Rosia, which is pretty interesting.
This girl could use some buffs. Again, she's not bad objectively, it's just in relation to other options we have available, she might just appear underwhelming by comparison. I want to ask all the people who pull for Rosia, do you still use her to this day or do you regret pulling for her? Let me know in the comments down below. That'll be all for today though, so if you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you left a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at FarsRM, join my Discord server, and check out my other Why No One Plays episodes or Wuthering Waste if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to... I think
Why No One Plays like an actual like limited 5-star character is a more compelling sort of video to talk about. I think this was a pretty interesting video. As someone who doesn't have Rosia, I've played her a little bit like from other people's accounts and other instances, but I didn't pull her for that reason of I didn't see her of being a benefit, someone that could elevate my account in any particular meaningful way. And I think a lot of points discussed here I think is universally like agreeable. I like this video a lot, and I think some of the suggestions of how to fix it would be interesting, would be good, but I don't think solves the overall problem of the even if she got buffed, where would she still be useful? Where would she slot in compared to others, like even now? But overall, hey, if you're a Rosia enjoyer, I'm happy for you. But if you're free to play, probably someone that you very much you'd want to avoid. But anyway, I appreciate you. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you guys on the next one. I'm live almost every single day on Twitch, on Kick, and I guess on YouTube now. I appreciate y'all. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.
Twitch.tv/Captain Cabinetz, Captain Cabinetz.